Hi, everyone. Good evening, good morning. I'm pleased and honored to open our dearest friend, Professor Jenna Morlon book launch. The book Seen and Not Heard, Why Children's Voice Matter was published by Ruan and Littlefield, and it's a masterpiece on childhood, children, their rights, and especially in my view, the adults' misunderstanding of them. This is a unique event because it's an exciting collaboration between colleagues and organizations in the US, Canada, Brazil, and Israel. My name is Aryeh Kizel, and I'm a professor in the Faculty of Education at the University of Haifa, Israel, and the president of ICPIC, and I'm happy to see all of you, our guests from all over the world. We are recording this event because many of the guests wanted to hear the recording because they cannot be here today. So we will have today 4 speakers: Dr. Natalie Fletcher, Professor Walter Omar Kaufman, Professor Jenna Morlon, and myself. Each one of us will speak, and then we will open for questions and open discussions. So I would like to ask all of you to turn off your microphones of your Zoom during our event. Let me introduce the first speaker, my friend, Dr. Natalie Fletcher. Natalie is an interdisciplinary researcher and a philosophical practitioner based in Montreal, Canada. She is an affiliate professor in philosophy department at the Université de Montréal, where she runs the Institute of Philosophy, Citizenship, and Youth. Natalie is the founding director of the educational charity Brilla, which has for 15 years now sought to develop critical thinking, social responsibility, and self-efficacy in young people from preschool to college through philosophical dialogues and creative projects. She ran training all over the world in all levels, and she served as the executive committees of various international organizations in philosophy for youth, including ICPIC, the American Philosophical Association Committee for Preschool Instruction in Philosophy. She has published multiple articles and chapters in the field, including an essay that won the International Award in Excellence in Philosophy for Children Research. She holds a doctorate in philosophy and pedagogy and has completed her postdoctoral fellowship on philosophy as a form of youth activism. Natalie considers the young philosophers with whom she works not merely as adults in a making, but as agents of change in their own rights. Natalie, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Ari. Thank you for that big introduction, my. Hello, everybody. I'm very, very happy to be here. Jenna, thank you so much for the invitation. And thank you for creating what I think will be such an important book for everybody who shares our concerns over childhood and what children should be able to be and do. So I would like to start by describing Jenna's book, its spirit, as an activistic one. And I mean that in the best possible way. I think that Jenna, in drawing from her long-term philosophical work and also her facilitation practice alongside children, has opened herself up to an insight that she just can't keep to herself. And she's done this throughout her career. Children's voices matter. In this light, I see her as a childhood activist, and I see us all here today as engaged in an activistic effort in the name of childhood. And I mean activism in its root sense, that is vigorous action to bring about change. So it's a doing, it's a driving forth, it's a capacity to act. It's one that's lively and galvanizing, and it's an advocating of energetic action. So to my mind, this description is significant because it reveals a moral imperative to share an insight that is simply not occurred to many people, that children as human beings have voices that should matter. And I believe, like I think Jenna does as well, that until this insight is recognized and integrated into our consciousness, there's a need for us to be allies of childhood and to be allies for children. But I do think it seems like a crazy notion of having to be allies for children, because it suggests that we have to be allies with what we have all experienced, with what some might say we once were, and what others might say we continue to be, depending on our definitions of what a child is and what childhood represents. So clearly our conceptions color how we engage with this topic. And I feel so privileged to be surrounded by such lovely humans such as Jana and Walter and Ari and all of you here today, who have wide-reaching and rich and textured and complex and evolving understandings of childhood and of children. So when I say that I think Jana's book is one of genuine activism, I'm also saying that it's my truest hope, my most sincere hope, that this work and others like it will help us to get to a place when even thinking about discounting children's voices will seem ludicrous and absurd, will seem like an affront to our moral values and to our sense of what counts as knowledge. That thanks to books like Seen and Not Heard, and in near future, the underestimation of children will seem so passé, will seem outdated, will seem like another source of discomfort when we look back to our history and see how much we've lost by discounting children's voices for so long. In the same way, hopefully, that we are approaching a space in time when we can look back and wonder how we could have ever been dismissive of humans on the basis of gender, race, class, ability, sexuality, and the like, and also dismissive of other life forms based on questionable criteria. A time when convenient dualisms like child versus adult and human versus nature cease to have any coherence in our minds and are therefore abandoned. So clearly, Jana, you've inspired me very much with this book, and I thank you for taking the time and such care in creating it. In her book, I think Jana has articulated something that for those of us who work with children, notably in philosophical practices with youth, confront daily: ageism, and more specifically, a particular form of ageism dubbed adultism. So for those of you here who are new to this term, adultism describes the tendency to disrespect young people by categorizing them as inferior or unworthy of agency. And it's rooted in ideas about childhood that tend to gravitate around two views. In the first view, as Jana describes in the opening chapters of her book, the child is seen as a mere eventual adult, representing an absence or insufficiency of grown-up qualities, or what philosopher of childhood Gareth Matthews, who was a huge inspiration to Jana, has called the deficit conception, rather. And then in a second view, the child is seen as a symbol of innocence and playfulness that must be protected from excessive interference by the adult world. And I think Jana, like many of us who are passionate about philosophy of childhood and committed to creating meaningful spaces for youth to express their voices, have sought to identify how such narrow visions of childhood might be impacting the ways young people are perceived and treated. So I personally, and I'm sure I'm not alone, wholeheartedly relate to the concerns that Jana raises in her book. I feel like I bump up against adultist views every single day in my work with children and the adults who accompany them. So to be very concrete, for example, when I run trainings for adults who want to learn about how to facilitate philosophical dialogues with children, I hear the following comment so often that it's become painfully predictable. Oh, what a nice idea to help children think and share their thoughts with one another, but it just won't work with my children, with my classroom, with my group of kids or teens. The ageism seems so rampant, even from well-meaning adults. And this mindset is so widely accepted that it seems barely noticeable, even though it can be as pernicious as any other form of discrimination. The unfortunate reality is that the prospect of thoughtfulness in childhood, which Jana celebrates with such eloquence and care, is not uniformly prized. The notion that children's voices matter on all kinds of issues, including the deep philosophical concepts that Jana presents, is not uniformly prized. Some adults may see that this proposal is not even desirable or even possible. But time and again, Jana's book highlights the threat and consequences of youth underestimation. And I'd like to build on this idea by suggesting that the underestimation of childhood occurs on two key levels. So first, there's a tendency to regard youth as less capable than they actually are in terms of their thinking, their creating, their collaborating, and specifically in their ability to cope with complexity and ambiguity. And I like to call this capability underestimation, and I'm drawing on ideas from the capabilities approach with that view. But a second view, which I think is super present in everything that Jana's writing about, is a propensity to judge youth's perspectives as less important because of their age, even if their ideas are as strong or even superior to those of adults. And I like to call this standpoint underestimation, drawing on ideas from feminist epistemology that I find mirror many of Jana's concerns. So to be brief here, the theory of standpoint epistemology has contributed to portraying marginalized groups as holding privileged perspectives on their own situated experience, but for some reason has yet to consider childhood as a significant site of marginalization. These theorists are concerned about what they call the outsiders within society, whose perspectives tend to be excluded by the dominant culture. And they argue that situated perspectives are crucial to knowledge as they illuminate insights from peripheral voices whose lived inequalities generate distinct standpoints. So why then can't children be considered outsiders within? Why haven't they been? This approach posits that an individual's perception of their autonomy is shaped not only by their particular lived circumstances, but also by their opportunities to deliberately formulate their standpoint through dialogue and an awakening to power relations. So couldn't this same process apply to childhood? Is that not in part what philosophical practices with youth aim to do? So I think Jana's book repeatedly underscores this problematic mindset of underestimation that can misconstrue, minimize, and underrate children and can judge them incorrectly, does not do justice to what they can be and what they can do. And to what she underscores, I want to add that youth underestimation can be instantiated in both people and processes. And I was thinking a lot about this while reading her book, that on the one hand, adults may have high regard for youth, but then adopt methods in their parenting and their teaching and their coaching that are condescending or patronizing and don't do justice to children. And then on the other hand, the approach that adults use might be very respectful of children, but get implemented by people with questionable adultist views. And this can risk nullifying any possible benefits as well. In fairness, as I think Jana also highlights, this underestimation may stem from a genuine concern about what youth can and should be expected to handle, but the impact should not go unnoticed, since as Jana highlights, it can color the kinds of perceptions and opportunities that children are attributed. What's worse, it can even lead to children adopting those mindsets themselves about themselves, so underestimating their own capability and their own standpoint. So in reading this and thinking about all these issues, I was wondering, can this be resolved? And I think that Jana exhibits such courage and hope in writing this book because her very effort suggests that it can be resolved, that it's possible to change adultist views. But I must confess that in reading the book, I found myself wondering sometimes whether that could be true. I had some controversial questionings. Are some people just plain ageist against children? Can their mentalities be changed? Do we all have adultist leanings on some level that interfere with how we can be around children? On a less extreme but still controversial note, I was wondering, should adults with adultist views be engaging with children? Perhaps certain adults cannot work alongside children unless or until they can change these mindsets. When it comes to facilitating philosophical dialogues with children, if this great responsibility is placed in the hands of an adultist adult, it could be very dangerous. In my more cynical moments, I often compare philosophical facilitation to snake handling. So the snake handler knows what to do and may make it look easy, but in the wrong hands, there could be trouble, toxicity, even trauma. As we have seen historically with so many other forms of discrimination, is there not a risk of having the oppressor try to care for a group while still believing on some level in the ideas that form the basis of the oppression? Or, more hopefully, do adults have great potential of overcoming adultist thinking because, unlike other forms of discrimination, it is harder to engage in the othering of children since we all experience childhood? So what I've noticed is the children showcased in Jana's book have airtime because Jana herself brought a very different mentality to her work. Philosophical practices with youth, like many other youth-driven practices, require a different conception of children that values rather than underestimates their capabilities and standpoints. They require us to recognize what philosopher of childhood Joanna Haynes has called their epistemic advantage of coming new into the world. So taking children's voices seriously means removing at least a minimal amount of censorship around what concepts they are free to explore. Some people within and beyond the Philosophy for With Children movement commend it for enabling children to speak about nice concepts like peace and happiness and benevolence. And while this is all well and good, it can lead to what I've called ready-made responses where children tell these adults what they think they want to hear. So some readers could be shocked by Jana's chapter on death, for instance. Should such difficult topics be the subjects of dialogues among children? But as Jana emphasizes, these are their wonderings. So how could we not? So returning to the notion of activism, I think the ideas in Jana's books have political import because they call for a redefinition of childhood so that ageism does not get in the way of their emerging agency. And to sum up, to conclude, I think Jana places children's thoughts right next to those of so-called professional philosophers and thinkers. And this is bold and it's necessary. And it's a way of modeling how children's voices should matter. She takes complex concepts from the philosophy of childhood and makes them accessible to everyone. And in so doing, her work is a form of awareness building, vigorous action to change conceptions of childhood that in turn can transform how children are viewed and treated. What I see as the take-home message and from Jana's book is seemingly uncontroversial in theory and yet so contentious in practice. Who we choose to listen to matters. Whose voices we include matters. It matters ethically in terms of what we value and what we see as morally significant. And it matters epistemologically in terms of what we count as knowledge and who we consider capable of contributing to knowledge. To my mind, the underlying question that quietly influences all the aspects of her book is what if we took youth's epistemic agency seriously? What if we considered how we treat children's knowing as a form of epistemic oppression? What philosopher Christy Dotson has defined as epistemic exclusions that produce deficiencies in knowledge that reduce certain people's capacity to participate in knowledge construction. What if? So I want to end with a little anecdote that echoes what I deem one of Jana's central concerns in her book. A few years ago, a journalist from a major newspaper here in Montreal came to visit one of our camps at Frilla, at my charity, to interview its young philosophers. And after witnessing a 2-hour philosophical dialogue on the nature of wisdom outside in the grass in the sun with a group of children from various ages, she approached the youngest boy with her version of a compliment. "That's really cute what you just said." He leaned back, looked her straight in the eye, and he replied, "Sure, it's cute, but is it reasonable?" Speechless, she scribbled in her notebook and sat back down. And then she listened. As Jana emphasizes in her final chapter, adult-centered expectations can dampen children's voices even when adults intend to listen. She writes, listening requires commitment, not just to the words, but to the ways that the words are shared. So let's listen. I think that's the take-home message. We really need to listen. And I'm very much looking forward to sharing this book with even more people so that they can also practice the ethics of listening. Thank you, Jana, truly.
Thank you, Natalie. What an opening. What an energy. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm happy now to present our dear friend and the second speaker, Professor Walter Omar Kaufman. He's in Brazil now. Walter Omar Kaufman is a professor of philosophy of education at the State University of Rio de Janeiro, senior researcher at the National Council of Research in Brazil, director of philosophy in the childhood of school life, and researcher at the Foundation of Support of Research of the State of Rio de Janeiro. He's the director of the Center of Studies in Philosophy and Childhood, State University of Rio de Janeiro, and he has been a professor, visiting professor at different universities in Italy, France, Portugal, Argentina, Mexico, and Chile. He is the co-editor of Childhood and Philosophy and has published over 100 peer-reviewed articles, chapters, and books in Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, English, and French. His main books in English are Philosophy and Childhood, Critical Perspective and Affirmative Practices, Childhood and Education and Philosophy, New Ideas for an Old Relationship, The Inventive Schoolmaster, and Thinking, Childhood and Time. And now his new book, Paulo Freire, A Biography. Walter, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Ari. How many minutes do I have?
10, 15.
10, 15. Okay, thank you so much. I'm very happy, joyful to be here. It's like being in a party, in a symposium, in a place where there's an exciting birth being announced, being celebrated, being shared. So I'm very thankful to you, to Jana, to Natalie for inviting me to share this moment, and also to the many friends and people who are here. I think it's a nice occasion, and I think that we are enjoying the joy of a new child. And it's interesting because it's a new child about child's voice. So it's a child coming to help us think our relationship to children and to childhood. And I think it's an extraordinary child, not only, also, but not only for the many thoughts, the many ideas, the many testimonies of children's voice that it gives us, but also because it helped us to renew some of our questions and some of our challenges in relation to childhood. So I think that's one of the things that personally I most appreciated in the book, which has many positive and lovely ideas, but is that it's a kind of coherence between what Jana aims and the way she gives space and voice to children in her book. So it's in a sense, in a way, Jana looks like a translator, like a mediator, like a listener to children's voice, and it's very nice. It's only one chapter, the first one, that Jana speaks more, but then it's she trying to fulfill what she aims and promise at the book. So as I have very few minutes, and I will try to focus on a couple of issues that hold my attention. How do we read the book, and what does it mean to read the book? So I was very attracted by the epigraphs of Jana. Some because we love them, and some because we hate them. And I'm sure that Jana also hates some of the epigraphs, but they don't make us feel indifferent. So there's one first lovely epigraph by Louise Gluzek in Nostos, that she says, "We look at the world once in childhood, and the rest is memory." I think this is lovely. I mean, it's like a synthesis of Jana's book in one sentence. So we can describe Jana's book also about remembering, or could be an effort to help the readers of the book remember what does the world look like in childhood. So to remember the way we look at the world in such a way that we only look at it in childhood, and the rest is memory. So it's also a book that it's about helping us to remember. It's a book that calls us to remember. And then the big controversial and, in a sense, adversary of Jana, which is an old English proverb. And this is nice because it is anonymous. So it's good that the people we don't like, we don't know who they are, because it's a proverb, it's anonymous. So it says, "Children should be seen and not heard." So, and I think this is also the core of Jana's lovely text. So how should we perceive children? How? Also, I would like to remember, of course, all you know, but that's that seeing and to see and to hear are just two senses in action. So the sight and the ear, the listening. Not so sure my English is okay here, but we have other senses, like the taste, like the touch, like the smell. So that's also a question I would like to open for Jana. Maybe one day she will write another book with the other senses. But and this is very particular to a specific culture and society, usually called West or European or whatever. But it's a society that has privileged mainly the sight over all the other senses, maybe because from Aristotle's metaphysics, the society was convinced that the sight is the more important of the senses because it can offer more and more differences or a higher number of differences. But I think it's already time to question this. It's already time to think about, and I'm also concerned that this might be listened. What I'm saying might be listened very differently in different cultures and society. But after this long time of pandemic, I have had the opportunity now. I'm traveling, visiting schools and other educational settings. And I've realized how important, at least in Latin American schools and educational settings, are things like smelling, tasting, and touching. So this is something I would like for Jana to consider, to think about, and to invite her to give some word. What about the other senses? And so I know I have a few minutes now, and I was planning to do some things I might not be in good time to do. But anyway, there's something. Also, there's something Natalie said that also caught me the attention so much when she said about that even in some people who appreciate children, there's the risk of not offering methods or ways to treat them accordingly to the way we think we should. So this also is really lovely in Jana's book, the coherence through the writing of her expectations of how children should be treated and listened in her case. And one more point I would like to suggest is that Jana's book is great, not only because she achieves what she wants, which I think is that we can realize and be exposed to some of the ways in which children original perspective, observations, and idea can transform our own thinking as adults. I think she achieves that, but also the way she offers us new questions. Because the idea or the question of if it is possible to listen to children's voice is really an issue. So Jana assumes, in a sense, that it is possible to listen to children's voice. And she argues why this is important, why it matters. And she offers great arguments. But I think that in another sense, Jana's book also recreates and reinforces the question about if it is really possible to listen to children's voice. So it's a kind of paradox, I think, because she offers good arguments to think that it matters to listen to children's voice, but also good arguments to question whether it is possible to listen to children's voice, or what are we listening when we think we listen to children's voice. And just the last thing, as Ariel told, I'm working with Paulo Freire, which last month has made 100 years old, a child of 100 years, we could say. And it made me remember many times many of the things that Jana offers, both in her arguments, but also in child's testimonies. That mainly one thing that Paulo Freire considered, you know, that Paulo Freire was awarded, among many things, when he was 60 years old, as a permanent child. So Paulo Freire probably would say, of course, I would like to read Jana's book, but even before reading, I agree with her. I know I would love this book because I know that to keep alive our child is a condition to be an educator of not only of philosophy, of any subject. And I would like to finish with a testimony of a child, precisely, which is in chapter 2 of the book, which if you don't think you need to read the book, I'm sure you'll realize you need to read the book just to read this testimony of Tyler. I know the names are changed, but it appears as Tyler, about childhood. It's so lovely. He says, I think that childhood never stops. I mean, we are always in childhood. We become who we are in childhood. When you are an adult, you are just an older child. Thank you so much, Jana, for just being an older child, just written as an older child, and just helping all who read your book to remember that we just see once to the world in childhood, and we need to remember it as often as possible.
Thank you, Walter. Walter is now in a tour in Brazil because of his book. So thank you for joining us. I know that it's a huge tour, so thank you. Now it's my turn. I actually read Jana's book twice. Reading in the Holy Land is a quite, you know, it's a deep reading. And Jana, I want first of all to thank you very much for your book. It's a mandatory book, must read for each educator whose children are very important to them. So I try to summarize my sometimes overwhelming feelings following the reading. So as in your seminal book, The Philosophical Child, in the current book, Seen and Not Heard, Jana Morlon suggests an outstanding contribution to our understanding, or actually our misunderstanding, of children's voice and why it matters so much, and it does. This book demonstrates the recent decades have witnessed the emerge of two dramatic processes within psychology and philosophy. Philosophy is challenging the view that children are irrational, egocentric, and unprincipled. Psychologists and neuroscientists are now arguing that young people learn, imagine, identify, and experience far more than anyone ever thought. Their capability relates primarily to their understanding of the world around them, rather than being immature adults or primitive individuals who gradually develop towards wholeness. They are a form of Homo sapiens on a par with adults. Adults and children's brain and consciousness differ from one another, being both complex and serving separate functions. In some sense, children serve as the R&D pool, throwing crazy ideas into the ring and provoking brainstorming opportunities. Adults, in constructs, function more as the production and marketing agents, turning children's fantasies into practical tools. Although we know all these facts, mainly from the scientific point of view, we still, as Jana emphasized in her important project, and especially in this book, don't place children a certain stage. This difference between the two populations, adults and children, is central because as we grow, our brain shut off its weaker, less used path and strengthens those who we use more. Infant and young children brains resemble to a wild field full of thorns and tickers. Adults' brain in construct look more like a cultivated gardens. Even though psychology proves that children's abilities are extraordinary, from raising broad scope hypotheses to causal inference, to show signs of structural thinking reason creatively in causal tests, we do not implement this great body of knowledge to our daily attitudes toward children. It's not just psychology. In recent years, as you all know, philosophical studies reinforce this view, suggesting that young children naturally ask great questions about themselves, their world, and the universe. Philosophy has almost completely refused to acknowledge children for more than its 2,000-year history. Philosophers of education have recently began to recognize children's thinking processes, led primarily by researchers and practitioners of philosophy for and with children. The centuries-long narrow scientific perception of children's cognitive abilities, according to which young people do not know or are not capable, is now giving way to a new understanding of how infant and young children know and comprehend. As the development of philosophy for children and philosophy with children programs over the past 15 years demonstrate, children can engage in critical, creative, and caring thinking in philosophical communities of inquiry. All the philosophical studies conducted within P4C and PWC framework, I mean studies, empirical studies, show young children who have not yet been forced into traditional educational molds still think creatively. Hereby, the school system paradigmized children's thinking, impending natural skills that enable them to think outside the box. Jenna is right, they can. They are still flexible because their thinking processes are characterized by lack of order, broad horizon, and rich imagination. They can thus make a significant and valuable contribution to humanity. But for schools, sometimes parents and systems, they are still unfortunately marked as incapable. Following Jana's impressive book, we should raise the big question: why do adults refuse to allow the voice of children? In Jana's words, in many ways we cherish childhood, but we don't take children seriously. In another citation of her, in similar ways, children's voice and their potential contribution to society go unrecognized. And as Natalie pointed out, and I also pick the same quotation, towards of the end of the book, Jenna says, listening requires commitment. These questions accompany this book. It hovers like a cloud above it from the opening chapter to the closing and concluding pages. I would like to connect two concepts, meta-concepts, that in my view can explain the why question: pedagogy of fear and casting a threatening shadow of knowingness on children's world. In my early article, Pedagogy of Fear as Paralyzing Man's Question, I characterized the educational philosophy that has traditionally demonstrated the Western world as casting a threatening shadow of knowingness on children's world. My students, Ronnie Schechter, who is with us here, hi Ronnie, is writing her thesis about these words now. Traditional pedagogies have long been used to encouraging students to stay silent rather than speak, to memorize rather than to be creative, and had been offered prepared answers based on textbook, authorities, traditional, rather than challenge conventional wisdom or ask, think, ponder and wonder about the world around us. Imprinting images on the mind of all involved, students, parents, teachers, decision makers, this practice actually creates an epistemic environment designed to convey the message that learning is passive, that teaching is a form of articulation, that knowledge is an object, and smart students are those in possession of knowledge, that is, those who master the small area of knowledge and play the rules assigned to them by adults. Under pedagogy of fear, the so-called good teacher is a skilled informator who conducts the class and draw out of their students' measurable achievements in line with statistical models and standardization. In this educational factor, dear Jenna, you don't need to be seen nor to be heard. Adults who adopt this reality rationalize and claim that it is meant to protect pupils from themselves, society, and the world. They observe the world as a dangerous space, dangerous. Their children as weak and need protection, and themselves as protectors. Therefore, students are structures as to a minimal universe of ideas that prevent them from engaging with multiple perspective, free conceptual play, process-based inquiry, and developing new concepts. Moreover, this enclosed space has clear borders and limitation, and frequently is misleading. More often, the adults reflect their own fears and lack of trust in the child, in their learning and his learning or her learning. So the notion of the shadow of adults cast over childhood overlap tradition of colonization adults as set forth by Rousseau, Matthews, and others. And Jenna Moore-Lone, in this sense, correspond in this book with the best critical theory thinkers by adding an original critical childhood theory that is rich and enriching. So in this oppressive educational space, the overshadowing is frequently connected to what I would like to offer you today as pedagogy of fear. Based on adults' chronic fear of the unknown, of what cannot be controlled, the pedagogy of fear seeks to monitor and to control students and teachers alike, by the way. Mistakes are marked as being dangerous. Thus, pedagogy of fear seeks to establish a hostile and traumatic epistemic environment in which error is avoided, but we know that error is a space of learning. So within this context, students understand that their job is to listen, repeat, and desist from making questions that require critical thinking or philosophical inquiry. Pedagogy of fear narrows the educational experience and its diverse perspective. It imposes the view that children cannot express themselves and their ideas, engage in creative and autonomous thinking. Reducing children to measurable statistics, pedagogy of fear reduces them to the status of object, ignoring their selfhood and independence. So under this shadow and this form of pedagogy, perceived as incapable, children are not invited to participate in any dialogue or give their own opinion about phenomena, feelings, consciousness, ethics, and any other serious subject. This shadow and this pedagogy prevent what Jenna calls make room for children to be both seen and heard. So in conclusion, Jenna's great book, and it is great, by the way, contribute to the process of emancipation and liberation, not only for the children and their thinking, but mostly and rather importantly for us, the adults, that ought to abandon the pedagogy of fear and to allow the shadow over children's world to be removed. Thank you so much, Jenna. And I'm looking forward for your future works. Thanks. And now, my dear friends, by the way, 100 students at the University of Haifa are watching us by television. They are not in Zoom, but they are watching us and they will send later the questions. So thank you very much and be'erev tov. And now, dear friends, I would like to give the floor and the podium actually to the author Professor Jana Morlon. But first, introduction. So Dr. Jana Morlon is the director at the University of Washington Center of Philosophy for Children and affiliated associated professor of philosophy. She is the author of the book Seen and Not Heard, The Philosophical Child, co-author of the textbook Philosophy in Education, Questioning and Dialogue in Schools, co-author of Philosophy and Education, Introducing Philosophy to Young Children, and has published dozens of articles about children's philosophical thinking. A frequent speaking about philosophical inquiry with children, she has been leading philosophy classes with students from preschool to graduate school for 25 years and working with educators, administrators, and families around the United States and internationally. She is the founding president of the organization Plato, Philosophy, Learning, and Teaching Organization, and the founding editor-in-chief of the journal Question, Philosophy for Young People. Jana, please.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to try not to speak for very long because I'm really interested to hear any questions or thoughts that you all have, and I want to make sure we make room for that. And consistent with the book, this is really about learning how better and better to listen to one another, children and adults. But I guess I will just start by saying how full my heart feels at having listened to 3 readers who really get the book, because you write these things and you're never sure whether they will be heard in the way that you intended them to be. So I feel very grateful for having such thoughtful and caring readers to introduce the book to you all. I'm just going to say a couple of things. I made a couple of notes as I was listening to Natalie and Walter and Ari, and I just wanted to respond a little bit to a few things you said, but as I say, I'm not planning to speak for very long. First, I really appreciated, Natalie, you pointing out that the book is in a way an act of childhood activism, because I didn't really think of it that way when I started writing it. The idea really was to portray for people how thoughtful and enlightening listening to children's voices are. But as I kept working on it, and of course our work at the center, we talk about how it's really about empowering children. But as I wrote the book and kept thinking about it, I realized it was really also an imperative to convince adults to let go of our preconceptions, which, as you say, why we develop these, given that we all were, and in some senses still are, children, I do not know, but it is clearly a huge part and such an unexamined part of our society. I mean, even people, as you say, who think they're listening to children, I will hear this happens all the time where someone will say to me, some child will say something that's really quite provocative, and the adult response will be, that is so adorable. And it just infuriates me. And so in this book, I try not so much to create an extended argument about this, but to just show what it is that children can do and the way in which it can be so transformative for us. So as I say at the end of the book, it's really about listening, and I try to do a kind of an extended analysis of what it means to listen, because I don't think that in our society we're particularly good at it, or that we particularly really understand how deep and committed a listening relationship has to be for it to be genuine and for it to carry. So I think the book really is, if I were to describe it, about celebrating children's voices and about helping adults to recognize, how much we have to learn from children and how enervating and exciting it can be to engage with children and have your own thoughts and ideas transformed, but also, as you say, Walter, to develop a greater connection with our own childhoods that are in the past, but also our own child selves that are still in the present. I think you say something like, you know, remembering what the world looks like in childhood. And I think that that is a piece of us that we all can connect with. And I think most adults actually really have a strong desire to stay connected to that, but often don't know how to do so. And children are this marvelous resource for us and are so open and willing to engage with us if we are able to do so in an unprejudiced way. And then just to take up your comment, Walter, about senses. So one of the things I was thinking about when you were talking was how the book is called Seen and Not Heard because there's this English proverb, right? Children should be seen and not heard. But then I started thinking not so much about the other senses, it got me thinking more about what does it mean to see someone? Because if you don't hear someone, can you actually really see them? Like we see them, of course, visually, but do we see them? No, I don't think so. So in some ways, I think it's interesting to think about what seen and not heard is actually in some ways paradoxical, because I'm not sure you can be seen and not heard. So I'm going to think some more about that because I think it's really interesting. And I do think, I mean, obviously our society privileges language and the visual. And so that proverb comes from that tradition. But I also think that there are larger meanings of these words seen and heard that I'm going to sort of think a little bit more about now that you've gotten me thinking. And Ari, listening to you talk about the pedagogy of fear, I actually started thinking that it's not just a pedagogy. It's not just an educational, it doesn't just take place in the educational arena. I think there is a fear of uncertainty, of the possible that starts to set in for many adults because we start to be very secure about the things we think we know. And the more we think we know, the more we think is not possible in some ways. And one of the things that's so refreshing about children's perspectives is that they don't have such a huge buildup of assumptions about what they think they know. And as adults, if we can keep that kind of childlike openness alive in us, I think the world would be a far better place. So I'm going to stop there and just, Ari, I think you're going to moderate the questions, but I just want to open it up for other voices. But thank you again, everyone who's here and the three speakers. I just so appreciated listening to everything you had to say.
Thank you very much, Jenna. So now we are open for questions. If you want to ask, please. Rita, do you want to be first? Please introduce yourself just from where are you, what are you doing, just.
Yes, thank you very much. Do you hear, can you hear me? My name is Rital Shani. I'm a master in Haifa University. I'm writing a thesis about critical thinking in the texts of Lippmann and Paulo Freire. And my question is this. I think that sometimes children's idea and thoughts are seen as naive. And if an adult proposed the same idea, it can consider to be a groundbreaking idea. And we don't trust children to be able to fulfill their ideas. So my question is, how can we as adults can change this point of view?
So I thank you for that question. And I've actually thought quite a bit about this whole idea of naivete and children being naive, because I think one of the problems is that we think there's a problem with that, right? I mean, there is I think especially in academia and in philosophy for sure, there's this pressure just to be very sophisticated and to make sure your ideas sound sophisticated. And I think that children, because they often express what they think in more direct and simple terms, certainly than academics do, they are labeled as naive, just as when you're in graduate school, you're afraid of being labeled as naive, right? But in fact, I think that's actually the problem, that if we could just listen to the idea without trying to decide if it's, sophisticated enough or who it comes from, right? The old fallacy, that would transform our ability to really be able to listen to what children have to say. And I have seen it happen. I mean, I have seen over and over teachers and parents and family members who have had their ideas about what children are capable of, to use Natalie's capabilities lexicon, transformed. So I do think that this is possible, but I also think part of the issue is our own categories and the way we stranglehold not just children, but also often each other by labeling what each other have to say before we even really think about the content of what has been said.
Thank you, Jenna. If you all will open the chat, you will see the written comment of David Alvarado, which is also lovely. David, are you with us? Do you want to comment or? Yes, okay. Do you want to add something? Okay. So Gilad, can you present yourself?
Yes, thank you. I'm Gilad. Thank you for this evening, really. I'm also writing my thesis about philosophical sensitivity, and I wanted to ask you, Jana, what is your conception of philosophical sensitivity regarding to the question of free will? I mean, if is there any element in philosophical sensitivity that precedes the choice or the conscious free will that can be take over or overwhelm the sensitive or philosophical sensitive child?
I'm not entirely sure I understand the question, so let me say what I think you're asking, and then you can tell me if I've got it right, and if not, maybe you can clarify. So what I think you're asking is does philosophical sensitivity precede choice? Do we sort of, are we born with it perhaps, or is it some kind of innate sensitivity and we can act on it or not? Is that the question?
Yes, yes, I mean, yes. If I'll put it in other words, I'll try.
Gilad, do you want to
Yes.
try in Hebrew and I will moderate the question? Is it easy? It will make it easy for you?
Yeah, I think the way you describe the question is close enough to my.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So in answer to that, I would say, I don't know, would be the honest answer, because I'm just not sure. I do think, if this is helpful, that everyone is capable of philosophical sensitivity. And I do also think that not everyone has it. So I think it is something kind of like, Aristotle's moral perceptual capacity that he talks about, which is really where this idea, when I started writing about philosophical sensitivity, came from. It came out of Aristotle. If we have sufficient training and education, and we make, as you put it, the choice to engage in what we need to do in order to cultivate this capacity, I think it is possible for anyone. Whether there's some, innate sensitivity bubbling around from the time we are born, I haven't a clue. But But I guess I would say, because I think the potential exists in human beings across the board, then I think that there is that, I guess that potential at least would precede the choice to cultivate it. If that's helpful. I'm not sure it's very helpful, but.
Gilad, is it okay? The speaker.
Yeah, thank you. Yes.
Gilad didn't mention, but he's a principal of a very progressive school near Tel Aviv. So thank you very much. And he has also time for academic life, which is a privilege by itself. Okay. Hani, do you want? Thank you, Gilad.
Hello, Jenna. You hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Congratulations on your new book. And I read your 3 chapters of the book. And my thesis, it's about the concept, the relationship in the thoughts of Martin Buber and Matthew Lipman. So I would like to ask you, how would you define the relationship between an adult and the child from the child's point of view? First, when the prejudice of ageism is dominant in society, and second, when there is an appreciation and reference to the deeper thoughts and ideas of children.
Thank you for your question. I think I will answer it not so much in terms of Lippmann or Buber, but just answering it more sort of straightforwardly, because I want this to be accessible to everyone. So I would say that when a child is faced with an adult who is who has a very narrow view of what that child is capable of, or how important or interesting anything the child is likely to say will be, then I think it is a very similar relationship that any of us have to someone who does not really see us, who is not really interested in who we are, but is interested in us as sort of an example of this already rigidly defined conception. So we feel, protective, a little bit shut off, and not as if we can openly and forthrightly express who we are or what we think and feel. We might start off doing that, but quickly, once we realize that the response to our expression is one that is either diminishing or demeaning, then we start to close off. And we see the relationship, I think, as one of not a mutual reciprocity, but a kind of an authority and subject in some way. If, on the other hand, we see the adult, as a child, we see the adult as someone who sees us as an equal, as someone with whom we can have a mutual exchange of ideas and thoughts, and who listens to us in the same way that that adult listens to people of the adult's age, then I think it's a very different kind of relationship. I think it becomes a relationship much like any other rich, open, mutual relationship that can exist in our lives, whether it's with someone our own age or someone of a very different age.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hani, and thank you, Jenna. Paul Bodin.
Okay, let's see if I can get my video going here. Hi, am I coming through okay?
Yes, great.
Yeah, wow, Jana, hi. We've been, I'm coming from Eugene, Oregon, and we've been using many of Jana's materials for many years, and I'm very excited that her book is, getting greater promotion in different parts of the world. I just wanted to mention that along with the value to children of philosophical discourse, particularly open-ended discourse where children have more agency. We found a terrific value to the adults who lead these discussions, that the qualities that we've discussed in today in terms of children, flexibility, the playfulness that they have in their ideas, the improvisational quality, that unpredictable comments that are made, and the imaginative qualities that we see in children where they kind of cross disciplines without even thinking about what they're doing necessarily consciously. Many of these qualities are start to kind of become transferred to adults who lead the discussions because they're forced to become more flexible, more improvisational, more playful, if they have an open mind and an open set of eyes as listeners. When they start to engage with children actively, they, in a sense, become more childlike. It's a really interesting thing that happens. And I just wanted to mention that there's a real benefit to leading discussions, even though it's very often very scary at first. So again, Jana, thank you for being here and for all the work that you've done. It's been very exciting to use your materials.
Thank you, Paul. Well, and I will say I feel that what you described when I'm with children. I felt so privileged to be able to have these conversations and to be able to sort of have the energy that comes from those conversations, change how I am in the world.
Okay. Ronnie, do you want to?
I'm sending you the question, okay, because I'm sorry, my dog is barking out there.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm sending the question here in the chat. It's okay?
Of course.
Okay.
Even though we like dogs. So.
Not so sure about it. My dog especially.
Okay. Welcome. שולחת עכשיו?
Yes, in a few seconds.
Okay. Okay, so this will be the last question, unless you have another one last question after Ronnie. Walter said goodbye because he had to leave, so okay. Ronnie?
Okay, I will try to ask.
Yes, try.
It's silence in here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so Jana, first, congratulations and thank you for this this book. I enjoyed your last book a lot and anxious to read this book. I wanted to ask you about the audience of the book. Who is, from your opinion or your point of view, the best audience? Educators, parents, maybe policymakers?
All of the above. I mean, I really tried to write the book in a way that would be accessible to anyone. And so I really try, as you know, if you read The Philosophical Child in my writing, to avoid philosophical jargon. And so I hope that this book will reach everyone who is interested in and open to rethinking their view of children. And so I would think that policymakers, people who run organizations that serve children, certainly educators and parents and grandparents and other family members, but really anyone who has aunts and uncles, anyone who has children in their lives. And because I think that, as people have said, it's a part as a way of helping people to rethink their view of children so that there can be more spaces opened up for children to come into adulthood as people who see themselves as having many valuable things to say and whose perspectives are important from the time they are able to speak. And because I think there's no better gift we can give children than that. But I also think it's a gift to adults because it can change us, as people have said, and I talk about in the book, in such positive ways and enrich our lives immeasurably. So for me, the book is really for quite a wide general audience in my view.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the last one, I see the hand of Masha. Is it the name? Yes.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi.
Hi. I'm Mahsa. I'm from Iran, and it's an honor for me that I'm here today. I'm master's student in philosophy, and I hope my English helped me to ask this question. I'm living in a society that is still some topics known as adult topics, and topics like death, religion, love. And now they tell us that we can do philosophy with children, but some topics, they are not nice to do with the children. So I was thinking about this thing, and then I asked myself, okay, why Liebman, for example, knows Lisa's topic for example, knows it's suitable for high school. And so I decided to ask this question: that are there really some specific topics that children shouldn't involve, or they can talk about all the topics? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question. So my feeling is that is first of all, no, I don't think so, because if you are coming into conversations with children and following their leads, so the questions that they raise, the questions they're wondering about, then I would be very uncomfortable in saying to a child, oh, I'm sorry, we can't talk about that. And I have had experiences in schools where children have raised topics, and the classroom teacher, when I was in the room, were sometimes have been a little uncomfortable, but we just follow where the children want to take it. So I think it'd be one thing to come into a classroom and say, we are going to talk about death today. I think that would be, or whatever the subject is. Although I will say, on the death topic, in my experience, that's probably the number one topic children want to talk about. When I ask children what questions they wonder about, questions about death are always on the list and near the top of the list. So I also think that adults deciding what children are interested in or want to think about is kind of part of the problem. And if we really listen to them, and not just listen to the question, because often you can hear the question and then it raises certain issues for you that you think are interesting, but that might not be the way that children want to take it. So it's important not just to listen to the question, but to let the children progress in the conversation. I mean, you're there to help them, but mostly you're there to listen to them and to help them make connections and think more clearly, not so much to lead the conversation in certain directions. And as long as I think you're not doing that, I don't really see that there's a risk, except maybe making some adults uncomfortable, in helping the children to talk about the issues they want to talk about. And I certainly would be very hesitant to have a list of things that are just, get cut off because they're not on the list or something. Now, that said, there may be in a particular school or a particular city or a particular society or a particular community, there may be some topics that are very loaded and that the adult feels might lead to bigger problems that are not controlled within the classroom. And that's a different thing, and that's something to think more carefully about. But I'm speaking in a context where that's not the case. So I would be hesitant about limiting the content. But as I say, if there are external forces that lead you to think we just can't touch this because we're going to, get shut down or we're going to get in trouble or whatever, that's a different matter and kind of beyond my expertise.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you for the question from Iran. And now I want to say goodbye, but my heart is beating because Ricardo wrote the last question. It's your decision if to answer by writing to him directly or to all of us. So
I'll just answer really quickly. So the reason that I did that is because in order to use the names of the children, I had to get releases from all the families. And there are probably, dozens, if not hundreds of children in the book. And I have had releases from some of them because some of them have been in videos or whatever, but some of them have just been notes that I've taken over the years or transcripts or recordings that are, some of them, have been around for a while. And so it was just impossible. And so I just made the decision that I was going to make it all anonymous after talking with the publisher, because that's the simplest way to do it. But it is an issue, although it's interesting. I do ask children about that. So I have had the conversation with children about, what do you think if I, when I'm writing this book, I'm just going to change everyone's name. And, and some of them have said, well, I kind of like, it if you had used my name, and other children have said, I don't want my name used. And so I think if I were to write a book about a specific group of children, like a long, ongoing series of conversations, I think I would ask all the children, and then I would only change the names of the children for whom I didn't have releases and who were not interested in having their names used. But because there were so many voices in this book, it was just a kind of a practical decision, honestly. But I recognize, as you kind of very nicely point out, that there are ethical implications to that.
okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So first of all, thank you, Jenna, for your great book. Congratulations from all of us. It's a mandatory reading in Haifa University now, so well done. Thank you, Natalie Fletcher, for your participation and the great talk. And then, of course, Walter, that left us. And thank you to all of you that came, and the questions and the participation of all of you. Hope to see you in our next events with new contributions of the community of philosophical inquiry, children's and philosophers with children. So thank you very much, and see you soon.
Thank you.
Peace.
Bye.
Thank you, Toda.
Yeah.
Bye bye. Thank you. Tada.